Hello, today's Excel video is going to be on the utilization of pivot tables. Now, a pivot table is one of those great and unknown thing that people hear a lot about, but they don't actually understand what it is or why you would use it, and they just seem to think you're some sort of magical Excel guru when you can create a pivot table. In reality, the creation of a pivot table is beyond easy. The most difficult part of a pivot table is actually knowing and preparing the data that you want. So you can play with a lot, because it's such a powerful tool, you can play with the layouts and you can get so many variations of information that it's just astounding. So what I've created here is a list of various labs and assets that can be utilized in a company. So this company's been in business for a little while. I've got a lot of different dates here, and they have a number of different assets that over the time are going to be depreciating. You're going to need to be able to replace them. So to be able to do something valuable with this information is why we're going to create a pivot table. So as you can see here, there is a number of data, a number of assets. So I have 119 pieces of assets that are valuing almost $3.6 million. So this is something a lot of people don't realize in Excel, is when you actually highlight a level of information, it actually tells you the details right here. So that's how I know that I have 119 pieces of data and it's 3.6 million. So if you just highlight this, you can see this is worth $32.7 thousand. So just something extra there beyond a pivot table. So I do have a lot of information. I could go in and filter and look at the various replacement dates, but if this was real information and you had a lot of labs like this, it would be a lot of manual information to be able to filter out and sort of plan for the next 5 years of asset replacement. So this is where using a pivot table would be very handy. So the way that I like to always proceed with a pivot table is to go right into the new worksheet and then go to your Insert tab and say Pivot Table. Now I'm very comfortable using pivot tables. I have a general idea of what I want to do. If this is your first time creating a pivot table, I suggest maybe utilizing the recommended pivot tables. Excel is very intuitive and it can make suggestions as to what you may want to have. But if you have a general understanding, you can just go ahead and say Pivot Table. It then asks you to select your range of data. So I'm going to just go from here. I do have a little bit of a top line that I don't want to touch on. So I'm just going to scroll down as I talk. And that's the information. I'm going to be using it into my existing worksheet because I did open a new worksheet. And I'm going to say OK. So this is the basis of your basic pivot table. When you are on your raw information of the pivot table anywhere here, you will have your pivot table fields. If you click outside of this, those fields disappear. Don't panic, they are still there. Just go back into your pivot table information and this is where you can now start to lay it out. So the first information that I want to have, because this is a yearly planning for asset replacement, is I actually want to have the replacement dates. And I want that replacement date information to be part of my column. So you can, to be able to very quickly do this, you can just click on it and it will, if you click, it will then throw it into the values. But I don't want that in my values. So what I'm going to do is just click on it one time and I'm going to pull it into the columns. So now you see all of my years come across here. And it says that it's a column label. So I'm going to change that to indicate year. Perfect. Now the next thing that I want is I actually want to know which lab is going to need replacement. So I'm going to click on location and I'm going to put that into my rows. So now you can see a list of all of the labs. So again here I'm going to change this label to labs. And now you have a list of all your nice little labs and the years. So the most important information now that I actually want is the purchase value, and I'm going to be wanting to put that into my values column in the field. So I'll capture this and pull it down. And now you actually see some quantifiable numbers. So there is some information in pivot tables. This on its own is a very useful tool. You can see the various amounts that the company needs to plan to build for the next little while. But I do find this a little bit less appealing to look at. So what I like to do is just sort of highlight. I'll go back home and I'm actually going to format the numbers to be columns. And as you see here, you can very quickly adjust column widths and how that looks. Now, the raw data in there is still set to what was this, but the appearance you can change. If you do try and change something, for example, the grand total, if you click on this, it'll tell you that you're not allowed to change the information that's been pulled from that. So it won't let you change something that it can't be impacted. But for this, I only want to plan for the next 5 years. So I'm going to select that information and just filter out to just look at my next 5 years. So now I would be able to set down and plan for my next 5 years of asset purchases. So as you're looking at this, you might say, okay, we can see here that the molding lab, it's going to need, $700,000 in the next few years. If you wanted to get some details about, well, which exactly are the assets within there, you can double click on it and it will show you and create a brand new sheet that shows you what makes up that number that you had clicked on. And equally, if you were to go to the end and the grand total and double click on that, again, it creates a new worksheet that gives you that information. So as you can see right there, it does take the raw information, pulls it into one new table, and then allows the user to be able to pull further and further. So if you wanted to add to this raw information and actually include your asset description into your rows, if you were to pull that down and put it underneath, you see now it then breaks out each of the assets within each of the labs. So that's giving you a little bit more information, and it's actually quite nice in that you can condense the information and just expand on what you want to look at. So that's just another sort of example. You can change the area and the way. So right now I have the lab as the first item with the sub-items being the asset description. With a simple click and pulling the location below, it then changes and shows where my assets are and which labs they're in. If I wanted to take that out, the location completely, you just pull it up there, and now you can actually see all of the individual assets. So you can see how it's very quick to be able to change and modify the information that you have in a pivot table. So if you are trying a pivot table for the first time, I would suggest that you, and you're not really sure what to do, I would suggest that you maybe try and use the recommended pivot table, but don't be afraid of using them. Play around with them. You can't hurt anything, and it's always kind of fun to see what you can come up with. Now, one thing that I do want to touch on, I just realized I didn't, is in your values section, it has a sum. If you look at your value field setting, it's showing that I've got a sum, but rather than having the total value, I could actually change that to count, and it would then show me how many of each item would need to be repurchased. So you do have that sort of additional information if you just wanted to get a general idea of which asset in which location. You can then have that breakout. So just with a couple of little clicks, you can very quickly change how your file is looking, and I think they're very handy. I do recommend, if you've never done them before, to use the recommended pivot tables and see what it suggests. But as you can see, it's not a big, hard thing to do. It's just a matter of knowing what you want to do. So if you try out a pivot tables now because you've watched this video, please just send me a little message and let me know that it worked out for you, because I do really enjoy using Excel and showing how that's done. So I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much and have a great day.